My stepmother accused me of horrible things during a family dinner, and my dad believed her lies. It shattered our bond for years. Hey, everyone, let me take you back to where it all began. I was 9 when my biological parents decided to split up. I'm a guy, and after the divorce, they shared equal custody. Most of my week, 5 days, was spent at my mom's place since it was close to school. Weekends, though, belonged to my dad. Despite their separation, both of them were always gentle and kind to me. Sure, I was upset they weren't together anymore, but deep down, I knew they both loved me, even if they no longer loved each other. A couple of years later, my dad met someone new, Gina. I still remember the first time he introduced her to me. I was 11, and she seemed nice. She smiled warmly, her eyes sparkled like she genuinely cared. My dad, though? He looked happier than I'd seen him in a long time, and that made me hope that we'd all get along. Gina wasn't alone. She had twins, Emma and Emily, who were 14 at the time. They'd basically only known their mom, no dad in sight since birth. Maybe that's why they acted the way they did, immature for their age. Public tantrums? Oh, you bet. If Gina or my dad didn't buy them what they wanted, or if things didn't go their way, they'd scream and stomp like little kids in a toy store meltdown. Me? I was the polar opposite. An introvert, quiet. I'd sit back, watching them make a scene, silently cringing as they embarrassed themselves. After a year of dating, Dad and Gina tied the knot. I was 12. Even my mom showed up at the wedding, supportive in her own way. I felt happy, genuinely happy. I thought, finally, another person in the family who's going to be there for me. And for a little while, I believed things were going well between me and Gina, but that illusion shattered just a few months after their honeymoon. One morning, when we were alone in the kitchen, she dropped the act. Her voice was cold, sharp, nothing like the sweet woman I'd met. "I don't really like you," she sneered, her eyes narrowing. "But we're going to pretend, for your dad's sake. When he's around, you act like everything's fine. Got it?" I just stood there, frozen. She wasn't done. "Oh, and when your dad's not here, don't bother me. I can't stand seeing your face. It reminds me too much of your mother." My heart? It broke right there, splintering into pieces. I didn't see that coming. I genuinely liked her. I thought we were going to have a good relationship, but to her I was nothing more than an unwanted reminder of my mom. And the twins? They heard everything. Later they'd taunt me, their voices dripping with malice. "You don't even have a dad," they'd whisper. "He loves us more than you." I'd cry quietly, the sting of their words lingering long after. Eventually, I told my mom what was happening. Furious, she called my dad and tore into him over the phone. "But Dad?" He refused to believe it. "There's no way Gina said that," he insisted. "You must have misunderstood." The next weekend, when I visited, Gina's mask cracked just enough for me to see the rage simmering beneath. She didn't say a word in front of Dad, but the moment he stepped out, she cornered me, her voice a venomous whisper. "If you ever tell your mom anything about me again," she hissed, "I'll make sure you don't have a dad left in your life." My breath hitched. She wasn't done. "I'll divorce him. Take every penny he's got. You want to see your precious dad living on the streets? No? Then keep your mouth shut." I was just 12, scared out of my mind. I nodded, terrified of what she might do to my dad. From that day on, Gina made it her mission to make my life a living hell. And being a kid, I thought I had no choice but to endure it. Silently. Whenever we were alone, she'd hurl insults, picking apart everything about me. My height, my weight, even my face. I hoped, prayed that my dad would notice. But he never did. In fact, he believed we had a great relationship. So great, he'd force me to go shopping or eat out with Gina and the twins. She'd swipe my dad's card to pay for our meals, but wouldn't let me eat anything substantial. While they enjoyed full-course meals, I was stuck with just soup or maybe dessert. No main course. I'd sit there, watching them laugh and eat while I quietly cried into my bowl, and when we got home, she'd force me to go to bed hungry. Night after night, I'd lie there, stomach growling, tears soaking my pillow. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally. Her hate was suffocating. By then, I was at my breaking point, angry, scared, frustrated. Not just at her, but at my dad too. Fridays became my worst nightmare. I'd dread going to Dad's place. I'd fake stomach aches just to stay with my mom. But my parents weren't fools. They started noticing. Dad would call, his voice dripping with disappointment. "I miss you, buddy. Why don't you want to see me?" Mom would press me too. "Is something wrong?" she'd ask, her eyes filled with worry. But I stayed silent. Gina's threats echoed in my mind like a sinister lullaby. By the time I turned 14, Dad planned a family trip to Greece. I didn't want to go, but Mom convinced me. "It's a chance to see the world," she said. "You should go." So, begrudgingly, I packed my bags. As expected, Gina turned on the charm in front of Dad, hugging me, asking about school like she actually cared. But beneath that sugary exterior, her cruelty simmered. She'd throw subtle jabs, her voice sweet, but her words sharp. "Oh, you play basketball?" She'd coo. "Shouldn't you be taller for that?" I was tall for my age, but that didn't stop her. "Maybe focus on your studies instead of sports," she'd add, her smile never faltering, "if you ever want to be something." The twins would giggle, calling me meathead, even though my grades were better than theirs. Dad noticed, sure, but he always brushed it off. "She's just teasing," he'd say when I told him it hurt. "Lighten up." Gina would nod, playing the innocent. "He has no sense of humor," she'd laugh. "He should have fun, like us." This went on throughout the vacation, day after day, insult after insult. Then, one day by the pool, something inside me snapped. They were at it again, Gina and the twins, mocking my weight while I tried to enjoy the water. I'd had enough. I turned to the twins, my voice steady but laced with anger. "At least I don't have double chins like you," I shot back. Their faces crumbled, the smugness vanishing. Then I looked at Gina, dead in the eye. "And maybe you shouldn't wear that shrug over your bikini," I sneered. "It doesn't hide your huge stomach." For the first time I saw her facade crack. Us, as we had spent countless weekends together working on it, bonding over the smell of engine oil and the sound of revving engines. Hearing this, I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was the recognition, the acknowledgement that despite everything, I still mattered to him. But the moment was fleeting. I noticed Gina's smile stiffen, her eyes narrowing just slightly, betraying the warmth she had plastered on her face. The twins exchanged glances, their excitement dimming as if someone had snuffed out a flame. The air at the table shifted, heavy with something unspoken, something simmering just beneath the surface. Then, like a switch had been flipped, Gina cleared her throat. "That's generous," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt unnatural, forced. But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, never left me. I tried to shake off the unease, focusing on my dad's words, but I couldn't ignore the tension that hung in the air. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness. The clinking of cutlery against plates felt louder than usual. Every word from Gina and the twins tinged with a passive-aggressive edge I knew all too well. Later that night, as I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The will, the sudden affection from my dad, the icy undercurrents from Gina, it all felt like the calm before a storm. And deep down, I knew Gina wouldn't let this slide. Adores her. Mara's kindness and understanding helped me rebuild the shattered pieces of my trust. She didn't just listen to my story. She believed me, without hesitation, without doubt. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again, like I wasn't suffocating under the weight of someone else's lies. But even with Mara by my side, the scars from Gina's betrayal ran deep. Every time I heard a sudden knock on the door or saw an unknown number flash on my phone, my heart would race. The fear, the anxiety, it never really left. I was always bracing for the next blow, expecting another false accusation to surface out of nowhere, ready to destroy the fragile stability I'd built. Yet as time passed, Mara's unwavering support and my mom's constant love helped me see that Gina no longer had power over me. Her lies had torn apart a family, yes. They'd left me isolated, battered emotionally. But they hadn't broken me. I learned to reclaim the parts of my life she tried to poison. Now when I think of my dad, it's with a hollow ache. The man who once taught me how to change the oil on that vintage car, who shared stories of his youth with a gleam in his eye, is gone, not physically, but in spirit. He chose to believe a lie over his own son. And that choice, it carved a rift too wide to ever bridge. But I've made peace with that, because in losing him, I found something more valuable: freedom. Freedom from toxic ties, from the constant need for approval, from the weight of trying to prove my innocence to people who never really cared to see it. Gina might have won the battle, but she didn't win the war. I did. And with Mara and my mom beside me, I finally have the family I deserve. Mara and Mom mean the world to me. Because of them, I've found a way to keep living, to find purpose in the wreckage of my past. Life had finally started to feel stable again, until last week. It was an ordinary day when my phone rang, the screen flashing with an unknown number. I assumed it was a delivery, maybe Amazon. Without a second thought, I answered. But instead of a delivery confirmation, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 7 years. Dad. The sound of his voice stopped me cold. He sounded older, warier. The first words out of his mouth were, "I've missed you." I didn't know how to respond. Missed me? After everything? I managed to ask, my voice tight, how he even got my new number. Only a handful of people had it, but he dodged the question, brushing it off, and instead asked, "Are you doing okay?" Silence hung between us. I finally told him to leave me alone. I had nothing to say to him. That's when I heard it, the crack in his voice. He broke down, sobbing over the phone. "Please," he begged, "please forgive me. I was so wrong to abandon you." Curiosity gnawed at me despite my anger. I waited, listening, and then the truth came pouring out. Dad told me that Gina had been cheating on him for years with his best friend. He'd confronted her with proof, thinking maybe there was some mistake, but she didn't even bother denying it. She was done pretending. She told him outright that she was sick of being married to a pathetic man like him. She didn't love him. She never did. She only married him for his money. And then came the final blow. When Dad pressed her for more, she admitted everything. The accusations she'd thrown at me? All lies. She hated me. She wanted Dad's wealth for herself and her daughters. That was it. That was the whole reason. Dad divorced her, of course. She didn't get a cent. Her lawyers tried to fight for alimony, but the affair sealed her fate. She walked away with nothing. Now here he was, crying into the phone, telling me he'd been waiting to finalize the divorce so he could reach out. He wanted to apologize, to make things right, to rebuild what we'd lost. "I want us to have a real father-son relationship again," he said. At that, I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Father-son relationship? I told him he was no father of mine. Any man who could throw his son away over some vile lies didn't deserve the title. I told him to never call me again, and I hung up. I hoped that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. Since that day, my phone hasn't stopped buzzing. Calls, texts, voicemails from Dad and family members I haven't spoken to in years. They're all saying the same thing. "Your dad's suffered enough. Why are you being so cruel? He's trying to make amends." Cruel? After everything he did. Now I'm left wondering, am I really wrong for cutting him out of my life? Update 1. My original post got locked, but I'm hoping this one sticks. I'm on mobile, so bear with me on the formatting. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's reached out with support and advice. Your words have meant more to me than you know. But I realize now, it's not just about Dad believing Gina's lies. It's deeper than that. For years, Gina tormented me. She harassed me, bullied me, manipulated me, and Dad did nothing. I was a kid, and she treated me like garbage, threatening to divorce Dad if I ever spoke up. I kept quiet all those years, thinking I was protecting him. But I wasn't. I was protecting her. I think it's finally time to tell my mom the whole story. She deserves to know. Update 2. Hey everyone, it's been a week since my last update. For those worried about my mental health, thank you. I'm okay. Your kindness has been overwhelming, so I booked tickets for my mom to visit. I needed to tell her and Mara everything. They already sensed something was wrong, but they didn't push. When Mom arrived, I sat them both down and started talking. I told them about Dad's unexpected call, about Gina's affair, about the divorce. My mom was stunned. She had no idea any of this had happened. She was furious. Furious at Gina, furious at Dad, furious at the years of silence. Then I told them the part I'd never shared before. I was 12 when Gina started manipulating me. I told them how she'd bully me when Dad wasn't around, how she'd threaten to ruin our family if I spoke up. I hadn't realized just how deep those scars ran until I started saying the words out loud. One memory after another came flooding back, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. Mara and Mom were both crying too. Mom rushed to hug me, her arms tight around my shoulders. "You should never have gone through this alone," she whispered. Mara echoed her, saying no child should have endured what I did. They both told me the same thing. I didn't owe Dad anything. I didn't have to explain myself. He abandoned me when I needed him most. The only reason he was reaching out now was because he was lonely. And they were right. If my dad truly loved me, he would have known I wasn't capable of what Gina accused me of. But he didn't know me at all. After that conversation, I felt lighter. Like a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying had finally been lifted. I've blocked Dad's number, and I'll block anyone else who tries to pull me back into that toxic family drama. I owe no explanations. Not to the people who abandoned me. Update 3. Wow, I can't believe it's been 6 months since I wrote that first post. So much has changed. First, something good. I proposed to Mara. She said yes. Mom's over the moon for us. We're even thinking about moving closer to her. The schools are better there, and since Mara and I can both work remotely, it just makes sense. Oh, and thanks to the advice I got here, I've started therapy. It's been slow, but I'm feeling better, bit by bit. I'm learning to focus on the good, on Mara, on Mom, on the future we're building together. The past was brutal, but it doesn't define me. Not anymore. I'm finally free.